main lobby of the recently sold company. Emily entered with her baby in her arms and a thin briefcase under her arm, ignored by security guards who only greeted those in suits. An assistant tried to stop her at the turnstile, but Mr. Harrison, the new chairperson of the board, appeared behind her and greeted her with a firm nod. In the packed auditorium where she was scheduled to speak, Mr. Thompson, the former director, was already seated in the back row, trying to maintain his composure. At the microphone, Emily adjusted her ID badge with her name printed in large letters, took a deep breath, and uttered the first sentence. "You mistook silence for consent." The silence was immediate. Do you enjoy intense, chaotic stories full of emotional tension? Then subscribe now so you don't miss a single one. Thank you for being here. Now, back to our story. Silence had always been her most effective tool. Not the passive silence of one who accepts, but the strategic silence of one who observes, analyzes, and acts when necessary. While others occupied meeting rooms with rehearsed speeches and colorful PowerPoints, she preferred numbers that never lied. The spreadsheets she organized not only reflected the company's reality, they anticipated it with almost prophetic precision. Each green or red cell was a coded message. Each ascending graph carried her invisible signature. The reports that landed on the director's desk, impeccable and punctual, were the result of nights she spent after everyone else had left, verifying data, cross-referencing information, identifying patterns no one else perceived. Her routine always began an hour before everyone else. She arrived when the building was still empty. Only the night security guards and emergency lights witnessed her dedication. She made strong coffee, turned on her computer, and dove into the previous day's numbers. It was in this moment of quietude that she noticed anomalies, the small deviations that foreshadowed bigger problems. No one knew her name on the upper floors. In the hallways, she was just the girl from the department or the one who understands the systems. Her desk was in a strategically forgotten corner, too close to the dead files and too far from the perfumed executives. There, she built bridges between departments that didn't communicate, resolved crises before they became public, and kept alive an order that everyone believed to be natural, spontaneous, almost magical. When the management system crashed, and it crashed frequently, she was the only one who knew how to restart it without losing data. When departments clashed over resources, she found intermediary solutions that satisfied both. When deadlines seemed impossible, she reorganized priorities so that everything fit perfectly. She now carried a life within her. The pregnancy manifested in slower gestures, calculated pauses, hands resting on her belly between one task and another. She felt the baby move during long meetings, small kicks that made her smile discreetly. For her, it was renewal, hope, future. For others, it became a convenient excuse. Her colleagues on the floor commented with tenderness. They brought fruit, offered tips, asked about morning sickness and preparations. There was genuine solidarity among these women who understood the challenges of balancing career and motherhood. But on the upper floors, the reaction was different. Mr. Thompson, the director, had never greeted her directly. A man in an impeccable suit and measured smiles for important clients, he moved through the spaces as if conducting an inaudible orchestra. His presence caused instant silences, straighter backs, nervous smiles. He made decisions that seemed brilliant to the board, signed reports that arrived ready on his desk, and spoke about merit and efficiency during corporate lunches without realizing that both stemmed from others' work. In the hallways, he walked quickly, always accompanied by assistants who jotted down his words as if they were divine revelations. He rarely looked at lower-level employees. When he did, it was a gaze that passed through them, seeing not people, but functions. Human resources, he called them. Asset capital, never people. His arrogance was as natural as breathing. He had been promoted quickly, not for technical competence, which had always been mediocre, but for his ability to sell narratives. He knew how to transform collective successes into individual achievements. He mastered the art of being in the right photo, shaking the right hands, saying the right phrase at the right time. When he received praise from investors, he accepted it with theatrical modesty. "It's teamwork," he would say, without ever mentioning who actually comprised that team. His office had glass walls, performative transparency that revealed real decisions happened in expensive restaurants, on golf courses, in private rooms where deals were sealed with handshakes and imported cigars. The change began subtly. Discreet comments in meetings. "Heidi spot, will she be able to keep up the pace?" someone asked in a low voice, believing she wouldn't hear. She heard, "Pregnancy changes priorities," another agreed, as if it were a scientific axiom. "Maybe it's time to think about reinforcements." She continued working with the same precision. The reports did not lose quality. Deadlines continued to be met, but the seed of doubt was already planted. Not doubt about her performance, that was impeccable, but convenient doubt, the kind that justifies decisions already made. 3 months before her due date, she was called to the HR office. The invitation arrived by formal post, cold email, without context. Administrative meeting, 2 p.m., room 301. She climbed. The elevator was broken again, another problem she would have fixed before, feeling the extra weight of the baby with each step. The room smelled of reheated coffee and old air conditioning. 3 people were waiting. Ms. Miller, the head of HR, a woman with severe glasses and a monotone voice, Mr. Jenkins, a corporate lawyer who did not introduce himself, and Mr. Peterson, a mid-level manager who avoided eye contact. None smiled when she entered. The message arrived wrapped in corporate bureaucracy. "Procedures exist to protect the company," Mrs. Miller said, reading from a prepared script. There was a folder on the table, papers aligned with surgical precision that contrasted with the moral disorder of the moment. Her position would be eliminated, they explained. Necessary restructuring, inevitable cuts. Nothing personal, nothing personal. What could be more personal than losing your livelihood when you're preparing to have a... What could be more personal than having years of dedication? She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't break down as they perhaps expected. She simply asked, in a firm voice that surprised even herself, if she could take the USB drive with the personal backups she kept as a precaution. They authorized without hesitation, without understanding the value of that small, trivial object. To them, it was just disposable digital memory, a few gigabytes of irrelevant data. To her, it was proof of everything she had built, a silent record of her competence. She asked about the ongoing projects. "Who will finalize the quarterly report?" Ms. Miller blinked, consulted papers. "The team will take over." Which team? Who on the team knew the specific methodology she had developed? Who knew where to find the necessary historical data? Awkward silence was the answer. She tried once more. "The interdepartmental integration system is in the testing phase. There is documentation, but some processes are complex. Can I prepare a manual?" Mr. Jenkins, the lawyer, intervened, his voice cutting. "Yummy. The company has adequate transition procedures. Your collaboration will not be necessary." She left. She handed over her ID badge. The rectangular plastic fell onto the metal tray with a dry, definitive sound, like a sentence served. In that instant, something in the air changed, an absence not yet perceived, like the moment before an earthquake. When birds stop singing and animals become restless for no apparent reason. She descended the stairs more slowly now, one hand on the railing, the other on her belly. In the lobby, she crossed paths with colleagues who didn't yet know what had happened. One asked if everything was all right. "Yes," she lied. Exception, the turnstile that no longer recognized her badge, a revolving door that spit her back out into the outside world. The afternoon sun beat strongly on her face. The street noise, cars, horns, hurried conversations contrasted with the institutional silence she had just left behind. She sat on a nearby park bench. She opened her bag, took out the USB drive. The object weighed almost nothing, but contained everything. Spreadsheets with 3 years of analyses, reports that had generated millions in contracts, emails that proved her authorship in projects attributed to others, presentations that the director had signed as his own. She didn't yet know what she would do with that information. Revenge was not her style. But truth, she thought, truth always has its moment. In the first week after her dismissal, the company continued to operate seemingly normally. Reports continued to circulate. She had automated them to a certain extent. Deadlines were still being met because she had organized time buffers. Meetings were happening, following scripts she had structured. It was as if she had never existed. Mr. Thompson signed 3 important contracts that week without even remembering that she was the one who had identified the opportunities months earlier, who had built the sales arguments, who had calibrated the proposals down to the last cent. In an executive meeting, someone commented, "The system is running perfectly." Another agreed, "Proof that our structure is solid." They laughed, satisfied with their own organization. They didn't realize they were navigating calm waters only because she had mapped all the currents, marked all the reefs, charted the safest course. But in the second week, small cracks began to appear. A missed deadline here, a contract that expired because no one remembered to renew it. Wrong number there, a financial report that came out with discrepant figures because no one cross-referenced the sources. Nothing serious yet, just signs. In the third week, an important client called, complaining about inconsistencies in their invoice. No one could explain. The system showed one thing, the manual records another. It took 3 days to discover that she maintained a parallel reconciliation spreadsheet, extra work she did voluntarily, without anyone knowing or asking. In the fourth week, the center crashed during an update. They called technical support. "You need to restart the main server," they said. Where was the administrative password? Technical documentation. Someone remembered. The girl from the department handled that. Girl, the one who was fired. It took 2 days to recover the system. 2 days of paralyzed operations. Clients without answers, suspended transactions. The loss was calculated in tens of thousands of dollars. Mr. Thompson called a crisis meeting. Furious. Someone needed to be held accountable. But who? The employee who kept everything running. She wasn't there anymore. Mr. Thompson called emergency meetings in quick succession. His voice echoed through the room with manufactured authority, volume compensating for content. "We need to raise our standards," he declared. As if the problem were a lack of effort and no room for mediocrity in this company. The irony was cruel. He was perfectly describing himself without realizing it. No one dared to contradict him. He was the face of success, the man who had transformed the company into a market leader, or so everyone believed. His corporate biography was full of achievements, annual revenue growth, expansion into new markets, excellence awards. What wasn't included was the invisible work that sustained every achievement. Subordinates tried to compensate for her absence. They worked late, reviewed documents 3 times, followed protocols to the letter with growing desperation. But something intangible was missing, that perception that anticipated errors before they happened, that ability to read between the lines of the data what would come next, that sense of timing that transformed raw information into strategic decisions. A young analyst, as David, recently hired and still naive about corporate dynamics, tried to follow her method. He opened the old spreadsheets, studied the formulas, tried to replicate the system. He spent weeks on it, but it was like trying to play the piano by reading sheet music without understanding music. The notes were there, but the soul of the composition was. He brought his doubts to his supervisor. "There are cells here that don't make sense. Why did she cross-reference sales data with customer complaints?" The supervisor couldn't explain. No one could. Only later, when they lost an important client who had complained 3 times without being heard, did they understand. He identified problems before they became crises. Those strange cells were an early warning system that no one else understood. Numbers became just numbers, no longer prophecies. Reports that once revealed trends now only recorded the past. The company became reactive when it used to be proactive. They were putting out fires when they used to prevent them. An important client canceled their contract in March. A large corporation that had done business for 5 years. The justification came via formal email. We have noticed a decline in service quality, recurring delays, inconsistencies in reports, lack of proactive communication that previously set you apart. Mr. Thompson called an immediate meeting. He wanted to know who was responsible for the account. It was Emily, they informed him. Then, who took over? Silence. No one had formally taken over. It was assumed that the work would be distributed among the team. But distributing without coordination is merely fragmenting. In April, another client canceled, then another in May. Justification varied in form, but was always the same in content. Delays, inconsistencies, lack of attention to detail. What once seemed like self-sustaining quality revealed itself to be the result of invisible individual effort. Mr. Thompson publicly blamed the team. They are not committed to excellence, he declared in an email to the entire company. Copied investors, wanting to show a firm hand. The message had the opposite effect. Morale plummeted. The best employees began updating their resumes. The environment became toxic. The irony went unnoticed. He was attacking the symptom without recognizing the disease. It was like a doctor who blames a fever for an infection, who treats a headache while ignoring a tumor. And the more he treated the symptoms, the more the disease spread. Meanwhile, the competitor grew. A small, previously irrelevant company began to win exactly the clients that his company was losing. It was no coincidence. There was a clear pattern. The same dissatisfied clients migrated there. And there they found what they had lost: attention to detail, proactive communication, quality that seemed intuitive but was the result of competence. The competitors' campaigns were more precise, their reports more convincing, their solutions more ethical. There was something familiar about that ascent, as if someone had transplanted the soul of one company into another. No one made the connection yet. No one asked where Emily was working now. Mr. Thompson hired external consultants. They arrived in suits even more expensive than his Italian leather briefcases, professional smiles, men who promised miraculous solutions in 6 months for fees that could pay 3 of Emily's annual salaries an entire year. They made obvious diagnoses in complicated language. Lack of interdepartmental synergy, they said. Translation: the departments don't communicate. Absence of data governance, they pointed out. Translation: no one organizes information. Deficiency in stakeholder management, they concluded. Translation: they lost contact with clients. They proposed expensive software, generic training, painful restructurings. They implemented methodologies with sophisticated names imported from foreign universities. Nothing worked, because it wasn't a matter of methodology. It was a matter of the right person in the right place, doing the right work, being justly recognized. The consultants left after 6 months and $500,000 in fees. They left a 200-page report that no one read completely and spreadsheets that no one knew how to update. The problem continued, and it grew. On a gray June afternoon, a department head found an old report forgotten in the archive room. He was digitizing documents to free up space, another task Emily used to do spontaneously and now had to be delegated. He absently flipped through it until he noticed the signature at the bottom. It wasn't Mr. Thompson's, but Emily's. Intrigued, he compared it with other documents. He would digital archive, cross-rates. The same meticulous formatting, the same impeccable organization, the same insights that had secured multi-million-dollar contracts. A July 2022 report that identified an opportunity in a new market, Emily's, a September 2023 analysis that saved an important negotiation. Emily's, a January 2024 presentation that impressed investors. Also Emily's, he showed it to his closest colleague, Mark, a senior engineer who had worked at the company for 15 years. "Ma, look at this. Do you recognize the formatting?" Mark examined it. "It's Emily's. She always used this font. This spacing. She said it made it easier for people with visual impairments to read." Small detail of empathy that revealed so much. They showed it to another, then to another. In a few days, the revelation spread through the hallways in cautious whispers, hurried conversations in elevators, encrypted messages. The empire had been built by someone who had never received credit, and now that person was no longer there. Someone created an anonymous spreadsheet comparing dates. On one side, report signed by Mr. Thompson. On the other, Emily's work documents with earlier timestamps. The correlation was perfect. Each of his achievements originated from her prior work. It wasn't a coincidence. It was systemic plagiarism. Some tried to bring the discovery to Mr. Thompson. They scheduled a meeting, prepared a careful presentation. He received them with impatience, looking at his watch. They began to explain. He interrupted before the third slide. "This is a conspiracy theory. You're looking for excuses for your own failure." He ended the meeting. He refused to look at the evidence. They were ignored because he didn't want to hear. To admit that truth would be to admit his own mediocrity, to recognize that he commanded not by merit, but by structural privilege. It would be to accept that his professional identity was a fictional construct, that his successes were misappropriation, that his authority was illegitimate. Arrogance, when confronted with uncomfortable truth, transforms into aggressive denial. And the more he denied, the more evidence emerged. It was like trying to hold back the tide. The truth always finds a way through the cracks. The micro fissure became a chasm. Delays accumulated in a worrying progression. Errors multiplied in a cascade. Clients migrated in a growing exodus. The company bled clients, reputation, and morale. Every attempt at control only accelerated the collapse, like a swimmer who thrashes and sinks faster. Meetings became a daily routine. Mr. Thompson demanded reports on reports, analyses on analyses. He wanted to know why everything was going wrong, but when he received honest answers, he rejected them. He only accepted explanations that exonerated him from responsibility. The market was tough, he said. Competition was unfair. The team no longer had the commitment it once did. Once did. The word echoed, once did, when Emily was there. The turnaround began unexpectedly in July, when the world wasn't paying much attention. A former employee, Liam, a young designer who had worked briefly with Emily before resigning due to the toxic environment, posted a discreet photo on social media. Emily, smiling, holding a plaque with a new title, Director of Strategy and Innovation. The name of the rival company shone in the background, a logo that was once unknown and now became familiar. The photo had the natural quality of a cell phone, not corporate polish. She wore simple clothes, the baby in her arms, sleeping peacefully. But her smile was genuine, something rarely seen in the corporate environment where she had spent years. The plaque had a phrase printed below the title, "Leadership is serving, not being served." The image went viral internally before any algorithm noticed. There was no public scandal. It wasn't in the newspaper. It didn't become a trending topic. But the silent shock was devastating among those who mattered, the employees who worked directly with her, the clients who missed her attention to detail, the suppliers who appreciated her honesty. Those who knew her immediately understood what that meant. The secret to the rival's growth was not mysterious investment from a foreign fund, not an extravagant strategy from expensive consulting, not the luck of being in the right place at the right time. It was relocated competence. It was talent, finally recognized. It was justice, albeit Mr. Thompson saw the photo, Someone forwarded it by email without comment, an act of passive rebellion. He opened it, stared intently for long seconds. He slammed his laptop shut with excessive force. He left the room without a word, crossed the hallway ignoring greetings, and locked himself in his office for 2 hours. When he returned, he called an urgent meeting. "We need to review all processes immediately," he ordered, hands trembling slightly as he wanted a complete audit. "I want to identify vulnerabilities. He didn't know what he wanted. Except the impossible, to reverse time. But it was too late for revisions. The collapse already had a set date, a defined trajectory at an accelerated speed. It was like an avalanche. You can see it descending the mountain, you can calculate the impact, but you cannot stop it. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't need to. She didn't make public denunciations, didn't give interviews, didn't expose documents. She simply worked with excellence in her new place. And excellence spoke for itself. While the old company sank into a self-inflicted crisis, she built something greater, with principles she had always carried. In her new environment, she found immediate recognition and structured respect. Her ideas were heard from the initial meetings, her strategy implemented without paralyzing bureaucracy, her leadership respected not by title but by demonstrated competence. Her pregnancy, previously used as a justification for exclusion, became a symbol of collective renewal in the corporate environment. The rival company, once small, ignored, underestimated, created extended parental leave after she suggested it. Implemented on-site daycare for employees with children. It established policies of real inclusion, not just empty declarations on a corporate website. Other companies began to ask, how do you grow so fast while maintaining ethics? The answer was simple but revolutionary. We value those who truly produce. Not those who appear in corporate photos, but those who solve real problems. Not those who talk about excellence, but those who practice it silently. Not those who accumulate titles, but those who deserve recognition. The second major turning point came when an external audit was commissioned by the old company. Pressured by investors worried about falling stock prices, by a board alarmed by a client exodus by unions questioning suspicious dismissals, Mr. Thompson had no choice. He needed to show transparency, or what was left of it. The auditors arrived in August, a technical team, serious, meticulous. They requested old documents, strategic reports from the last 5 years, correspondence with important clients, records of projects that generated significant revenue. They wanted to understand how such a solid company had collapsed so quickly. It was then that they discovered numerous strategic reports, decisive presentations, and market analyses bore a discrete digital watermark, metadata that identified the true author. Each file had an edit history, who created it, when it was created, how many hours were dedicated. And the name that appeared repeatedly was not Mr. Thompson's, it was Emily's. Documents he had signed in important meetings had been created by her weeks earlier. Presentations that impressed investors bore her mark on every slide, every graph, every argument. Strategies attributed to him were developments of her original ideas, which were contained in dated emails, in saved drafts, in earlier versions of the files. An auditor, a middle-aged man who had seen a lot in his long career, commented to a colleague, "In 30 years of doing this, I've never seen such systematic intellectual appropriation. It wasn't an isolated case of plagiarism. It was a complete structure of invisibilized exploitation. The auditors needed to confirm. They contacted her professionally. They explained the situation, asked a request without surprise. She had been expecting that moment since she's USB drive. They scheduled a virtual meeting. She appeared on screen with her baby in her arms, a domestic setting in the background, a humanity that contrasted with corporate coldness. She spoke with a serenity that impressed the auditors. "I kept copies of everything, not to blackmail or seek revenge, but to protect my own professional history. When your contribution is systematically invisibilized, you learn to document." She provided the files organized by date, project, impact. There were spreadsheets showing a correlation between her work and corporate results. There were emails where she suggested strategies that later appeared as Mr. Thompson's ideas. There were drafts with timestamps proving that she had created content attributed to others. She also provided human context that numbers couldn't capture. I did it because I believed in the work, not because I expected recognition. But when I was fired due to prejudice disguised as procedure, I realized that silence was complicity with injustice. The audit report took 3 months to complete. When it finally reached the board in November, it was devastating. 200 pages documenting not only administrative incompetence, but systematic appropriation of others' work. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was a serious ethical issue. The most impactful section listed specific cases: Project Alpha, 2021, expansion into a new market that generated $12 million in revenue, feasibility report created by her, presented by Mr. Thompson as his own idea in a board meeting, Campaign Beta, 2022, client retention strategy that increased renewals by 34%, methodology developed by her, credited to the marketing department headed by a man who barely understood the concepts, Analysis Gamma, 2023, identification of opportunity in an emerging sector, her research, his presentation, credit to him, promotion to him, and so on. Page after page of irrefutable evidence. The company's official narrative collapsed like a house of... The board demanded explanations. Mr. Thompson had none. He tried to argue that it was normal management practice, that superiors signed off on teamwork, that this was merely corporate formality. But the auditors countered, "There's a difference between signing as a responsible manager and appropriating as the intellectual author. There's a difference between coordinating a team and invisibilizing individual contributions. There's a difference between leading and plagiarizing." The third turning point happened when the competitor, now consolidated as a real force in the market, launched an innovative project in December. An ethical management platform based on collaborative intelligence, a system that promoted transparency in credit attribution, a methodology that encouraged recognition of individual contributions. The principles were exactly the same ones Emily had applied in the old company, only now with adequate resources, an engaged team, and the freedom to flourish without obstacles. The market reacted with enthusiasm. It wasn't just a product, it was a manifesto. It wasn't just a tool, it was a movement. Clients migrated en masse, not because of price, the platform was more expensive, but because of values. Companies that wanted to build ethical cultures found there a practical example, a useful tool, inspiring leadership. Someone commented in a specialized business forum, "It's as if the soul of that company had changed address and now finally found a suitable body." The phrase was quoted, replicated, discussed. It became an accepted truth in professional circles. A journalist from a business publication wrote an article analyzing the two cases without naming companies. When talent is underestimated, it doesn't disappear, it just seeks space to flourish. And when it finally finds that space, it transforms not only its own trajectory, but the entire market around it. The fourth turning point came in January, when a deeper board investigation exposed not only intellectual appropriation, but also accounting irregularities committed under Mr. Thompson's command. Criminal, but ethically questionable. Excessive bonuses while cutting salaries, personal perks disguised as corporate expenses, contracts with companies owned by family members. He, who saw himself as a victim of bad luck and unfair competition, was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. His arrogance had blinded him. He hadn't lost the company due to bad luck or conspiracy. He had lost it due to incompetence disguised as leadership, prejudice masked as procedure, exploitation normalized as management. The corporate board called a special meeting for February. A large room with an oval table of noble wood, leather chairs that had witnessed decades of decisions. Mr. Thompson sat in the center, a position that once symbolized power and now seemed like the defendant's seat. He was surrounded by faces that had admired him and now judged him with tangible disappointment. Numbers were projected on the white wall, growing quarterly losses, contracts lost in alarming progression, plummeting stock prices that destroyed investors. Each descending line on the graph was a silent accusation. Each red dot represented betrayed trust. Mr. Harrison, the chairperson of the board, a man with gray hair and a measured voice that inspired genuine respect, opened the meeting without preamble. We need to understand how we got here, not just the numbers, we already know those, but the decisions that led to the numbers, not just the errors. Those are evident, but the patterns that allowed the errors. Not just what happened, that's documented, but why it happened. Patterns. The word echoed through the room with the weight of a sentence. It was then that the board began to investigate not just Emily's specific case, but the complete history of management. What they discovered shocked even the most cynical members. They discovered that it wasn't an isolated case of injustice. It was a symptom of a toxic culture. Other talented female employees had been dismissed under vague pretexts over the past 5 years. Always women, always in technical roles where competence was measurable, always replaced by less qualified men, but considered more suitable for the company's leadership profile. Ms. Davies, a board member and executive who had built her career at a time when women had to be 10 times better to be considered half as competent, asked to speak. She opened her laptop, shared her screen. I did a statistical analysis. In the last 5 years, 18 women in technical roles were dismissed. Of those, 16 had above-average performance reviews. 3 had received internal excellence awards months before their dismissal. She continued, her voice firm but laden with contained indignation. The official justifications varied: restructuring, cost-cutting, profile adjustment, but there's a clear pattern. Competent women are perceived as a threat, not an asset. Women who demonstrate superior competence to men in positions of power are systematically removed. Mr. Chen, a younger board member, added, and when we investigated who was promoted to the vacant positions, we found another pattern. Men with family connections, with degrees from the right universities, with an appearance that matched the leadership stereotype, but not necessarily with proven competence. One of the oldest board members, Mr. Wall, who had defended Mr. Thompson until then, read aloud excerpts from the audit report they had received weeks earlier. The former employee identified 87% of the market opportunities realized in the last 3 years. He developed a predictive analysis system that reduced operational costs by 34%. He mediated interdepartmental conflicts that increased measured productivity by 28%. He created a risk management methodology that prevented estimated losses of $8 million. All of this without formal recognition, without career progression, without even a mention in reports presented to investors. A dense silence filled the room, heavy as lead, suffocating as fog. Another board member continued, flipping through printed documents, and when she became pregnant, she was dismissed under the justification of position elimination. The official justification mentions necessary restructuring, adjustment of personnel, optimization of human resources, bureaucratic language that hides a prejudiced decision. He opened another folder. But internal documents reveal emails with telling expressions. Quote verbatim, "She won't be as productive with a child at home." Another, "We need someone without personal distractions that could compromise deadlines." Another, "Women at this stage of life tend to prioritize family over career." Mr. Thompson tried to defend himself, his posture erect, his voice attempting firmness but sounding defensive. "You're taking things out of context. These were legitimate concerns about operational continuity. We had tight deadlines, demanding clients, critical projects, we needed to ensure that he was interrupted by Ms. Davies, the board member who had done the statistical analysis. Ensure what? That competent women remained invisible, that their successes were appropriated, that their contributions were systematically erased. Again, you need to understand the context of market pressures, fierce competition, the need to make difficult decisions quickly. We don't always have time to. Mr. Harrison, the chairperson of the board, interrupted him this time with a kindness that was cruel in its honesty. The problem is not just what you did, it's what you never realized you were doing. You didn't see people. You saw resources to be exploited or discarded. You didn't recognize contributions. You appropriated them as if they were naturally yours. You didn't lead a team. You managed a hierarchy based on unexamined prejudices. He paused deliberately before continuing. And, when confronted with evidence, your first reaction was not to correct. It was to deny. It was not to take responsibility. It was to blame others. It was not to learn. It was to defend the indefensible. The fourth turning point happened when current employees began to speak out, not in open revolt that could be suppressed, not in strikes that could be negotiated, but in voluntary resignations that became a silent referendum. One by one, competent professionals left the company. Engineers, analysts, coordinators. Some went to the competitor where Emily worked, others to startups, still others to larger companies. But all carried the same implicit message. We don't want to work in a place that doesn't value real talent, that doesn't recognize genuine contributions, that doesn't respect people as people. HR tried to conduct exit interviews. They asked, "Why are you leaving?" The answers varied in form but converged in content. "I don't see a future here. My work is not valued. I prefer to be in a place that recognizes effort. The culture here is not healthy." Mark, a senior engineer with 15 years at the company, was particularly direct in his exit interview. "I worked with Emily. I saw how they treated her. If someone so competent can be discarded so easily due to prejudice, what guarantees me that I'm not next? I'm not going to wait to find out." The final address of the special board meeting came from a board member who had always been discreet but commanded, stood up, adjusted her, organized her papers, and spoke without preamble, her voice clear and firm. "We built an empire on invisible labor. We celebrated leaders who merely signed off on worded speeches about meritocracy while nepotism. We dismissed the force that sustained us because it didn't match the image we preferred to see. This crisis is not moral. We didn't lose market share due to technical. We lost it due to ethical bankruptcy. We were not defeated by the competition. We were defeated by our own choices, by our own prejudices, by our own collective arrogance." The cadence of her words created an almost poetic rhythm, an anaphora that hammered home truths. It is not procedures that protect institutions. It is treated with dignity. It is not control that generates excellence. It is mutual respect. It is not hierarchy that builds sustainable success. It is the recognition that everyone contributes, and we failed in all three fundamental principles. She continued, now looking at everyone present. We cannot reverse the past. The lost contracts will not return. The tarnished reputation will take years to restore. But we can decide what kind of company we want to be from now on. We can choose to learn from our mistakes or repeat the same patterns in a new scenario. The room remained in absolute silence. There was no way to refute such evident, documented, irrefutable truths. The judgment was not only against Mr. Thompson individually, it was against an entire system that allowed, encouraged, and normalized injustice. The board voted for broad structural changes, a complete audit of all hiring and dismissal processes of the last 10 years, the creation of a truly independent ethics committee with veto power, clear and measurable policies for recognizing merit with proper credit attribution, and total transparency in promotions and salary increases. They also voted, after a long and painful debate, for Mr. Thompson's removal, not out of personal revenge, not as a convenient scapegoat, but out of practical necessity. He represented a culture that needed to be overcome. Your name has become a symbol of everything that is wrong with this organization, Mr. Harrison said with genuine sadness. You have competencies, no doubt, but your leadership style, based on appropriation, rigid hierarchy, and unexamined prejudices, is incompatible with the future we want to build. We need to leave behind not only your specific errors, but what they represent systemically. The fifth turning point happened when he had finally understood, not suddenly or dramatically like in a movie, not with inspiring music in the background, gradually, painfully, processed in sleepless nights and increasingly unsustainable denial. He saw himself reflected in the disappointed faces around in the empty chairs of employees who had resigned, in the reports that proved his success had been built on unrecognized work by others, in the numbers that showed the collapse caused by his decisions, in the emails that revealed his prejudices disguised as pragmatism. He understood, finally, that power without dignity is a sandcastle before that leadership without recognition is disguised tyranny. That success appropriated from others is one's own moral failure. When he left the meeting, removed but not destroyed, he carried a belated understanding. He had confused position with competence, control with leadership, and others, silence with consent. He had built a career on a cracked foundation, and now, at 53, he needed to rebuild not just his career, but his character. Time became a cruel ally of truth. 3 months after the special meeting in February, the company was sold in May, not by strategic choice, not by market opportunity, but by economic and moral inevitability. The buyers were an international group that promised total restructuring and heavy investment in a new organizational culture. The name would change, the leadership would change. It was almost like starting from scratch, carrying the weight of the past moral ballast. Employees who remained received the news with mixed feelings: relief at not losing their job, apprehension about the new management, sadness at seeing the end of an era. Even if it was an era stained by systemic injustices, companies are made of people, and people form bonds, even in imperfect environments. Emily watched it all from afar, without the vindictive satisfaction that would be understandable, but wouldn't match her character. She didn't celebrate the fall. She didn't post triumphant messages on social media. She didn't give interviews exploiting the situation. She simply continued building with integrity in her new place. Her son was born in December, during the most intense period of the old company's crisis. A healthy boy, with curious eyes that already observed everything around him, a future as open as a clear horizon. She held him in her arms while revising strategies for a new project at the company where she now led. Motherhood and leadership were not conflicts, she discovered. They were complementary facets of who she had always been. The competitor, now consolidated as a market leader, expanded operations into 3 new countries. She led a truly diverse team, people from different backgrounds, varied experiences, unique talents that were previously ignored in traditional corporate structures. There, merit was a real criterion, not empty rhetoric for a social responsibility report. The ID badge she wore had her full name in large letters, her explicit, unambiguous title, and a phrase printed below that had become the company's manifesto. Leadership is recognizing those who build. The 6th turning point happened when Mr. Thompson, the former director, sought her out in June. Not at a public event where it would be a performative gesture, not in a formal meeting that would be mutually awkward, but in a simply, almost timid message sent via LinkedIn. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I would like to talk if you'll accept. I need to say things I should have said years ago. She read the message 3 times. She consulted mentors, trusted colleagues. Some said, ignore him, you owe him nothing. Others argued, perhaps it's an opportunity to teach, not just for him, but for all who are watching. she decided to accept, not out of obligation or naive kindness, but out of an understanding that social transformation also happens through difficult conversations, through honest confrontations with past mistakes. They met in a discreet coffee shop away from corporate eyes. It was a Sunday afternoon, soft light streaming through the windows. He arrived punctually, looking physically smaller, aged beyond the months that had passed. His hands trembled slightly as he held the coffee cup he didn't drink from. "I need to apologize," he began, without preamble. His voice faltered with every other word. "Not just to you, although you are the one who most deserves to hear this, but to all the people I underestimated, excluded, ignored over the years. I spent my life believing that success was an individual achievement, that leadership was hierarchical command, that recognizing others' contributions would diminish my value." Paused, swallowed. "I learned too late that real success is a collective construction, that true leadership is serving, not being served, that recognizing others doesn't diminish me. My mediocrity was always there, just disguised by invisible work that I appropriately." He listened without interrupting, observing his body language. It wasn't a performance. It was the genuine pain of someone confronting their own shadow and not liking what they saw. When he finished, she responded with the honesty that had always characterized her. "I accept your apology. You need to understand that forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You can change, yes. People change when they confront difficult truths. You need to do more than apologize in a private conversation. You need to act differently publicly. You need to use your experience to teach others not to make the same mistakes." He agreed, eyes moist. "I'm working on it. I'm not seeking easy redemption or collective forgiveness. I just want to do things differently from now on." In the following months, he kept his word. He became a volunteer in organizations that promoted equity in the job market, not in a leadership position where he could repeat old patterns, but as a learner, listening more than speaking. He gave lectures about his mistakes, not past successes. "I was a director who destroyed a company through arrogance and prejudice," he would begin. "I'm here to tell you how not to lead." His brutal honesty was disarming, educational. He wrote articles for business publications. "How I Learned Too Late the Price of Injustice" was the title of one that went viral. "I Confessed My Privileges and Found Humanity" was another that generated productive debates. He became a living example of possible, but not easy, redemption. Not the Hollywood type of redemption where one speech solves everything, but a slow, consistent transformation, verifiable in concrete actions. The seventh turning point was collective and systemic. Inspired by the case that had become a study in business schools, other companies began to review their practices. Business associations created a code of ethics, including explicit recognition of intellectual authorship in corporate projects. Policies emerged against veiled discrimination, the kind that leaves no obvious traces but systematically destroys careers. Specialized consulting firms for equity audits were hired. It wasn't a revolution, but it was measurable change. The movement was slow, as real structural changes always are. But it was real, not just cosmetic. Companies that implemented genuine changes grew. Those that only did empty marketing were exposed by employees on review platforms. She founded an institute in September 1 year after her dismissal. It was focused on training women leaders in technical fields, not paternalistic charity, not welfare that maintains dependency, but an investment in human capital, skill development, and the creation of support networks. It offered mentorships with experienced female executives, updated technical courses, and professional connections that opened previously closed doors. Its motto, printed on every certificate awarded, was a phrase she had learned through pain. No talent should remain invisible due to lack of opportunity. Funding came from multiple sources. Her new company contributed generously. Other organizations joined. Individuals donated. But she made sure the institute was sustainable, not dependent on fluctuating goodwill. The eighth turning point happened when the company that had dismissed her, now under new management after the sale, invited her for an internal lecture in October. The invitation came via Mr. Harrison, the chairperson of the board who had remained after the transition. We know we have no right to ask, but your story is important. Our new employees need to understand past build a different future. Be accepted after negotiating. It would not be a celebratory event or a forced reconciliation. It would be an honest lesson about justices, about how prejudices disguise themselves as procedures, about dignity as a foundation not only moral, but economic. The auditorium was packed when she recognized faces, old colleagues who had remained, some embarrassed others emotional to see her. There were also new people, hired in the restructuring, curious about the legend that circulated in the corridors. She spoke for an hour, without resentment but without softening truth. You didn't lose me just because of an individual manager's prejudice. She said, you lost me because you confused control with leadership, hierarchy with competence, and silence with consent. You lost me because you built a culture where some voices were amplified and others were systematically silenced. She continued, her cadence firm. I learned that healthy institutions are not afraid to recognize those who truly build. They are not threatened by others' competence. They don't need to appropriate credit to validate leadership. I hope you also learn this, not theoretically, but in the daily practice of every project, every meeting, every decision about who to promote and why. At the end, a question and answer session revealed real changes. A young engineer asked, how do we ensure this doesn't happen again? She replied, collective vigilance, clear policies for recognition, transparency in credit attribution, and the courage to confront injustice when you see it, even when it doesn't directly affect you. The USB drive she had taken when she left, that small object that contained years of invisible work, was donated to the Historical Archive of the Business Association in November. It became a physical symbol displayed in a glass case. A plaque beside it explained, this device contains evidence of systematically invisibilized work, donated as a reminder. Every contribution deserves recognition. Every voice deserves to be heard. Every talent deserves opportunity. Business students visited to understand the case. Professors used it as an example in ethics classes. Executives paused to reflect on their own practices. The symbol had evolved completely. The discarded ID badge had become a identification in a new context. The ignored reports turned into historical evidence of merit. The motto was completed in multiple versions. All true. Procedures exist to serve people, not to silence them. If you have ever been invisible in your work, know this. Your strength remains real even when ignored. You witnessed injustice and remained silent. Choose today to recognize those who build around you. Dignity is not a concession that superiors grant. It is a right everyone deserves. And everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be seen, heard, and recognized for what they truly contribute.